A story etched in blood, sacrifice, and the unyielding pursuit of an idea. This is the story of the American Revolution, a war that defied an empire and birthed a nation. The year is 1775, tensions that have simmered for over a decade between Great Britain and its 13 American colonies are about to boil over. The Crown, burdened by debt from the 7 Years' War, had imposed a series of taxes on the colonists: the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act. But this wasn't just about money. It was about a principle: no taxation without representation. Colonists, who had no voice in the British Parliament, saw these acts as a profound violation of their rights as Englishmen. The Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party were not isolated incidents. They were flashpoints in a growing ideological fire. The air was thick with radical ideas spread through pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which argued that it was absurd for a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. Independence was no longer a fringe idea. It was a rallying cry. On the misty morning of April 19, 1775, that cry was answered with the crack of muskets. In the small Massachusetts towns of Lexington and Concord, colonial militiamen, the famous Minutemen, stood against a column of British regulars sent to seize a hidden cache of weapons. The shot heard round the world had been fired. A rebellion had begun. In the wake of the bloodshed, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. They faced a monumental task: to unite 13 disparate colonies against the most formidable military power on earth. Their solution was to form a Continental Army, and their choice for its commander was a Virginia planter with military experience and an unshakable presence: George Washington. Washington knew the odds. The British Empire was a global superpower. Its Royal Navy dominated the seas, and its army was a professional, disciplined, and battle-hardened force. In contrast, his Continental Army was a ragtag collection of farmers, merchants, and artisans, poorly equipped, barely trained, and serving on short-term enlistments. The early years of the war were a testament to this disparity. The struggle was brutal and unforgiving. The Continental Army suffered a string of humiliating defeats. They were driven out of New York City in 1776, forced into a desperate retreat across New Jersey. Hope flickered. Many believed the revolution was on the brink of collapse. But on Christmas night, 1776, Washington executed a daring masterstroke. He led his beleaguered troops across the icy Delaware River to launch a surprise attack on Hessian mercenaries stationed in Trenton. The victory was small in military terms but immense in morale. It was a sign that the rebellion was not yet broken. Yet, the hardships were far from over. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge became a legend of American endurance. Washington's army, encamped in Pennsylvania, was ravaged by disease, starvation, and the bitter cold. Thousands perished without a single shot being fired. Soldiers lacked shoes, blankets, and food, yet they endured. Under the tutelage of the Prussian drillmaster Baron von Steuben, this crucible of suffering forged a more disciplined and professional fighting force. The men who survived Valley Forge were no longer just militiamen. They were soldiers, bound by a common cause and a shared ordeal. While Washington's army drilled at Valley Forge, a pivotal moment unfolded in upstate New York. The British launched a complex campaign to seize control of the Hudson River, aiming to cut off New England from the other colonies. But the plan went disastrously wrong. In the fall of 1777, an American army under General Horatio Gates surrounded and defeated General John Burgoyne's entire British force at the Battle of Saratoga. This victory was the turning point of the war. It was a stunning, decisive triumph that shattered the myth of British invincibility. More importantly, it convinced a world power that the American cause was viable. France, eager for revenge against Britain after its defeat in the 7 Years' War, had been secretly aiding the colonists. Saratoga gave them the confidence to enter the war openly as an American ally. French money, weapons, soldiers, and most critically, the French Navy, would now be committed to the fight for American independence. The conflict was no longer a colonial rebellion. It had become a world war. With the war in the north at a stalemate, British strategy shifted. They turned their attention to the south, where they believed a large population of loyalists would rise up to support the crown. The British captured Savannah in 1778 and Charleston in 1780, inflicting the worst American defeat of the war. For a time, it seemed the Southern strategy was working. The war in the Carolinas devolved into a vicious and personal civil war. Neighbors fought neighbors and guerrilla tactics, employed by patriot leaders like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, took a brutal toll on British forces and their loyalist allies. The Continental Army in the South, now under the capable command of General Nathanael Greene, engaged in a brilliant campaign of attrition. Greene understood he couldn't win a head-on battle against the main British force under Lord Charles Cornwallis. Instead, he led Cornwallis on a grueling chase across the Carolinas, stretching British supply lines and wearing down his army. After a costly battle at Guilford Courthouse, a battered Cornwallis made a fateful decision. He marched his army north into Virginia, hoping to sever American supply lines and consolidate his position. He chose a small port town on the Chesapeake Bay to establish his base. The town was called Yorktown. This was the opportunity Washington had been waiting for. In a feat of masterful coordination and deception, he secretly marched his main army, along with a large French force under the Comte de Rochambeau, over 450 miles south from New York to Virginia. The plan was a daring gamble that depended on perfect timing. Just as the combined Franco-American army arrived to lay siege to Yorktown by land, a French fleet under Admiral de Grasse sailed into the Chesapeake Bay. They defeated the British fleet sent to relieve Cornwallis, cutting off his only route of escape. General Cornwallis and his 8,000-man army were trapped. The siege of Yorktown began in September 1781. American and French cannons relentlessly pounded the British fortifications. The Allied troops, with Alexander Hamilton leading a heroic charge on a key British redoubt, tightened the noose day by day. Cornwallis's situation was hopeless. On October 19, 1781, the sound of a lone British drummer boy playing a tune called "The World Turned Thee Upside Down" echoed across the battlefield. The British army marched out between lines of American and French soldiers and laid down their arms. The war, for all intents and purposes, was over. The surrender at Yorktown shattered the British will to continue fighting. Peace negotiations began in Paris. On September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Great Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States of America. After 8 long years of war, a new nation was officially born. The cost was immense. Tens of thousands of lives were lost on both sides. But the outcome reshaped the world. The American Revolution was more than a war for independence. It was a war for an idea, the radical notion that government derives its power from the consent of the governed, and that all people possess certain unalienable rights including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was the promise of 1776, a promise that continues to inspire people around the globe. The story of the American Revolution is a reminder that history is made by ordinary people who dare to do extraordinary things. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the past enlightening, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that shaped our world.